Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The wagon was screaming, not the woman inside. She had stopped screaming 10 minutes ago when the smoke filled her lungs and stole her voice. It was the wood, the iron-rimmed wheels, the canvas top curling black and peeling away like dead skin. The wagon sat 40 yards off the trail between Jawbone Ridge and the Cimarron Salt Flats, Oklahoma Territory, 1883. Nobody for miles. Nobody except Obadiah Thorne, a lone cowboy riding south on a buckskin mare named Parrish, who smelled the smoke before he saw it. He pulled the reins. Parrish stamped. The sky was the color of rust, and the fire was the only living thing on the horizon. Obadiah rode hard toward the blaze. He was 31 years old, lean and long-armed, with sun-cracked skin the color of saddle leather and pale gray eyes that had seen things he never spoke about. A scar split his left eyebrow where a bottle had caught him in a Dodge City saloon 4 years back. He wore a faded black hat, a canvas duster coat with a torn collar, and boots so old the soles were held on with wire. He was nobody. A man who worked ranches until the work ran out, then moved on. No family, no land, no name worth remembering. But he could hear the chains rattling inside the fire, and nobody rides past chains. He jumped from Parrish and hit the ground running. The heat pushed him back like a wall. The wagon's side panel was already half consumed, orange flames licking upward through the slats. Through a gap in the burning wood, he saw her, a woman, young, crumpled on the wagon floor with her wrists shackled to an iron ring bolted to the frame. Her dress was white once. Now it was black with soot and torn at the shoulder. Her dark hair was matted across her face. Her eyes were closed. He couldn't tell if she was breathing. Obadiah pulled his bandana over his nose, grabbed the burning side panel with both hands, and ripped it away. The wood bit into his palms like teeth. He didn't stop. The chain was padlocked. No key. He drew his revolver, pressed the barrel against the chain link closest to the ring, turned his face, and fired. The chain snapped. He dragged her out by the arms, her body limp and heavy, and carried her 30 yards to where the grass was still green. He laid her down. Her chest wasn't moving. He pressed his ear to her ribs. Nothing. Then he pushed on her sternum the way he'd seen an army doctor do once on a drowning man in Kansas. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th push, she coughed, a violent racking sound that brought black soot and spit from her lungs. Her eyes opened, dark brown, terrified. She looked at him and whispered one word. "Don't." That was all. Don't. Not thank you. Not help me. Don't. As if the act of being saved was the thing she feared most. As if every hand that had ever reached for her had come to take, not give. Obadiah knelt beside her, his burned palms bleeding into the dirt, and said nothing. He just stayed. The fire behind them collapsed into itself with a sound like a giant exhaling. Parrish stood 20 yards away, watching, and on the woman's neck, half hidden beneath her torn collar, was a mark. Not a bruise, not a burn, a brand. The letter M, scarred into her skin like a cattle stamp. Obadiah saw it, and his stomach turned to stone. Someone had branded this woman, and someone had left her to burn. She wouldn't speak for 3 days. Obadiah made camp beneath a sandstone overhang near Beaver Creek, where the water ran shallow and clean, and the rock walls blocked the wind. He built a lean-to from juniper branches. He gave her his blanket, his canteen, and the last of his dried beef. She took everything without a word. She ate like an animal, fast, hunched, eyes darting, as if the food would be snatched away. He recognized that posture. He had eaten the same way as a boy in the workhouse in St. Louis before he ran west at 14. Hunger has a shape. He knew its every angle. On the second night, he cleaned her wrists where the shackles had cut into her skin. The wounds were deep, crusted with rust and dried blood. She flinched when he touched her, but didn't pull away. He used strips of his own shirt soaked in creek water, wrapping each wrist carefully, the way a man wraps a gift he has no right to give. She watched his hands the entire time, not his face, his hands, as if she were waiting for them to change, to curl into fists, to grab. They didn't. When he finished, he sat on the other side of the fire and said, "I'm Obadiah. You don't have to tell me yours." On the third morning, she spoke. Verity. That was all. One word, offered like a coin placed on a counter. Enough to buy. Passage, but nothing more. Verity. He didn't ask for a last name. He didn't ask about the chains, or the fire, or the brand. He boiled coffee in a tin can and handed her a cup. She held it with both bandaged hands, the steam rising around her face, and for the first time, her shoulders dropped a quarter inch. Not trust. Not yet. But the body's first tentative negotiation with safety. Like a horse that's been beaten finally standing still long enough to accept water from a steady hand. That afternoon, Obadiah found something in the wreckage of the wagon. He had ridden back alone while Verity slept, picking through the charred remains for anything useful. Most of it was ash, but in a tin box that had survived the fire, he found 3 things. A bill of sale dated 6 weeks prior, signed with an X and a thumbprint, a lock of dark hair tied with a blue ribbon, and a daguerreotype photograph of a young girl, maybe 16, maybe 17, standing beside a man with a thick beard and hollow eyes. The girl in the photograph was Verity. The man's hand rested on her shoulder, not like a father's hand, like an owner's. On the back of the photograph, in faded pencil, "Received in full, M. Druitt." Obadiah stared at the bill of sale. The seller's name was listed as Ezra Pardoe. Relationship to subject. Father. Obadiah sat in the ash for a long time. The wind moved through the burned wagon frame like a whisper through bones. Her own father had sold her, signed her away with a thumbprint, like livestock. The M branded on her neck, Druitt's mark, the chains, the fire. Someone had tried to destroy the evidence, or destroy the girl, or both. He folded the bill of sale and the photograph and placed them in his coat pocket. He left the lock of hair in the box and buried it in the dirt beneath the wagon. Some things should stay in the ground. He rode back to camp with a knot in his chest that no amount of distance would loosen. He said nothing to Verity. But that night, for the first time, he didn't sleep. He sat with his rifle across his knees and watched the dark, because now he knew someone had paid for this woman, and paid men come to collect. They rode double on Parrish for 4 days, heading southwest toward the town of Taloga. Obadiah needed supplies, medicine for Verity's wrists, food, and ammunition. Verity sat behind him on the mare, her bandaged hands holding the back of the saddle, never touching him. She kept a distance even when there was nowhere to go. On the second day, a rattlesnake crossed the trail and Parrish spooked. Verity grabbed Obadiah's waist to keep from falling. She let go within a second, but he felt her hands trembling through his coat. Not from the snake, from the touching, from the involuntary act of reaching for another person. Contact, for her, was a language she had only ever spoken in pain. Obadiah began to learn her through silence. She walked with a slight limp. Left ankle. Old break. Never set properly. She flinched at sudden sounds, but not at thunder, which meant the things that had hurt her were human, not natural. She could read. He discovered this when she picked up a discarded newspaper page blown against a fence post and read it front to back, her lips moving slightly, her eyes quick and hungry. She was not stupid. She was not broken. She was something more dangerous than either. She was someone who had been told she was nothing and had almost believed it. Almost. The almost was what kept her breathing. On the third night, he told her about himself, not because she asked, she never asked anything, but because he understood that trust is not a door you open. It's a bridge you build, plank by plank, from your own side first. I grew up in a workhouse, he said, staring at the fire. My mother left me there when I was 6. Said she'd come back for me. She didn't. He paused. I stopped waiting when I was 10. I stopped hoping when I was 12. I ran when I was 14. Verity said nothing, but she moved her bedroll 6 inches closer to the fire. 6 inches closer to him. In the arithmetic of trauma, 6 inches is a mile. They reached Taloga on the 5th day. It was a hard little town. A church, a saloon, a general store, and a livery stable arranged around a dirt square baked white by the sun. Obadiah went into the store alone while Verity waited with Parrish behind the livery. He bought bandages, carbolic salve, tinned beans, coffee, and a box of .44 cartridges. The shopkeeper, a thin woman named Mrs. Adair, looked at his burned hands and said, "Fire?" Obadiah nodded. "Prairie fire," he lied. Mrs. Adair studied him. "There's a man been through here asking about a girl," she said, her voice dropping. "Big man. Rides with 2 others. Name of Druitt." Obadiah's blood slowed. "When?" he asked. "Yesterday," she said. "Headed east." East, toward where the wagon had burned. Obadiah walked out of the store with his jaw set and his purchases under his arm. He didn't run. Running attracts eyes. He loaded the supplies onto Parrish, led the mare to the back of the livery, and found Verity sitting against the wall with her knees drawn up, her bandaged wrists resting on them. She looked up and saw it immediately. The change in his posture, the way his hand rested near his holster. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." But as he pulled Parrish toward the back gate, Verity grabbed his arm. She was staring past him. Across the dirt square, tied outside the saloon, stood a black horse with a silver ornament on its saddle. A steer's skull, polished bright, catching the afternoon sun. Verity's face drained of color. "That's his horse," she whispered. Druitt wasn't a day east. He was here. He was in Taloga. Right now. And the saloon door was opening. They didn't run east or west. Obadiah took them south, into the broken gypsum hills along the Washita River, where the terrain folded into canyons and the rock walls swallowed tracks. He knew this land from a cattle drive 2 years prior. The hidden draws, the box canyons, the spring-fed pools where a horse could drink and a fire wouldn't be seen. They made camp in a narrow canyon with walls the color of bone. That night, with the stars packed tight above them like salt in a wound, Verity finally told him the truth. All of it. And it was worse than anything the bill of sale could say. Her father, Ezra Pardoe, had been a preacher in Caldwell, Kansas. Not a good man playing a holy man. A weak man who believed his own sermons until the whiskey proved stronger. Her mother died when Verity was 11. After that, Ezra drank the church's money, gambled what was left, and owed debts to men who collected with knives. When Verity was 17, a man named Marcus Druitt rode into Caldwell with cattle money and a reputation that made people cross the street. Druitt saw Verity hanging laundry behind the church. The next day, he visited Ezra. By sundown, a deal was made. Verity was sold for $40 and a forgiven debt. Her own father signed her away like a deed to a played-out claim. Druitt took her to his ranch near the Cimarron. She was not a wife. She was not a worker. She was property. He branded her with his initial, the M that stood for Marcus, the same way he branded his horses. He kept her in a room with a bolt on the outside. She cooked. She cleaned. She endured things she would not name, and Obadiah did not ask her to. When she tried to run, twice, he chained her to the wagon and dragged her back. The third time she ran, Druitt's men caught her on the salt flats, chained her inside the wagon, and set it on fire. Not to kill her, Druitt had said, to teach her. But the fire grew too fast, and the men rode off thinking she was dead. She would have been, if not for a lone cowboy who smelled smoke on a windless afternoon. Obadiah listened without moving. His hands were flat on his knees. His face was stone. But inside, something was rearranging itself. The quiet, drifting purposelessness that had defined his life for 17 years was being replaced by something with edges, something with weight. He had spent his whole adult life riding away from things, away from towns, away from debts, away from any attachment that might require him to stay. Verity's story didn't make him angry. It made him still, the kind of still that comes before a man decides to stop running and turn around. He looked at her across the fire. "You're not going back," he said. "Not a promise. A fact. Like gravity. Like sunrise." Verity stared at him. "You don't know what he is," she said. "He has men. He has money. He has the law in 3 counties looking the other way." Obadiah nodded. "I know what he is," he said. "I've known men like him my whole life. They buy things because they can't build them. They break things because they can't keep them." He paused. The fire crackled. But he made a mistake. Verity's brow creased. "What? Mistake?" Obadiah looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her, the way you look at something real. He didn't make sure you were dead. And the canyon walls held that sentence like a cathedral holds a prayer. Somewhere above them, an owl called once into the dark. And the night, for the first time in Verity's memory, did not feel like a cage. Obadiah left Verity in the canyon with Parrish, a rifle, and enough food for 3 days. He rode north on a borrowed mule from a rancher's line camp, traveling light, moving fast. He wasn't going to find Druitt. Not yet. He was going to find Ezra Pardoe, the father who had sold his daughter for $40 and a cleared conscience. Obadiah needed to understand the kind of man who could do that. Not for sympathy, for strategy, because a man who sells his own child is a man who will do anything when cornered, including testify if the alternative is worse than confession. He found Ezra in a sod house outside of Caldwell, living alone in a single room that smelled like mildew and regret. The man was 50, but looked 70, hollowed out, yellow-skinned, hands that shook even when he wasn't reaching for the bottle. He wore a preacher's collar, black and frayed, as if the costume might still protect him from what he'd done. When Obadiah knocked, Ezra opened the door with the eyes of a man who'd been expecting someone to come. Just not this someone. "I'm here about your daughter," Obadiah said. Ezra's face collapsed like a mine shaft giving way. He didn't ask which daughter. He only had one, and he knew exactly what had become of her. "She's alive?" Ezra whispered. He sat on the edge of a cot that sagged like a hammock, his hands between his knees. Obadiah stood in the doorway, filling it. "She's alive. Barely. No thanks to you." Ezra flinched. "I didn't have a choice," he said. "Druitt would have killed me." "So you gave him your daughter instead." Ezra's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I thought he would take care of her. He said he wanted a wife. He said—" "He branded her," Obadiah said, and his voice was so quiet it was almost inaudible. "Like cattle. He burned your initial right off her neck and put his own there. Does that sound like a husband to you?" Ezra began to cry. Not the dignified, silent kind. The ugly kind. Snot and heaving, and sounds that came from somewhere below the stomach. Obadiah watched and felt nothing. Then he felt something unexpected. Pity. Not forgiveness. That wasn't his to give. But pity for a man so small that his own cowardice had become his prison. Ezra had not sold Verity out of cruelty. He had sold her out of weakness, which was worse, because cruelty can be fought. Weakness just folds. "I need you to sign a statement," Obadiah said. "Everything you did. The sale. Druitt's name. The amount. What you knew." Ezra looked up. "He'll kill me." "He might," Obadiah said. "But your daughter is alive, and she's free. And right now, you're the only person who can make sure she stays that way." Ezra signed. His hand shook so badly the letters looked like they were written during an earthquake, but he signed. Every word, every detail. $40. A thumbprint. His daughter's body traded for his own survival. When it was done, Obadiah folded the paper and put it in his coat beside the bill of sale and the photograph. 3 documents now. A dead man's confession written by a living coward. As he turned to leave, Ezra said, "Tell her I'm sorry." Obadiah stopped in the doorway. The light outside was white and merciless. "No," he said. "You come tell her yourself. If you've got anything left in you that's still her father, you ride to Taloga and you say it to her face." He didn't look back, but he heard Ezra sobbing through the sod walls as he mounted the mule and rode south. The sound followed him for miles, thin and high, like wind through a crack in a door that should have been closed a long time ago. Obadiah made it back to the canyon in 2 days. Verity was alive, the rifle unfired, Parrish calm. But something had changed. She had braided her hair, a small thing, a human thing. The act of a woman who had decided she might have a tomorrow worth preparing for. She looked at Obadiah when he rode in and said, "You found him." Not her father. She meant Druitt. "No," Obadiah said, "but I found something better." He showed her the signed statement. She read it twice, her lips pressing into a line so thin they disappeared. She didn't cry. She had used all her tears on men who didn't deserve them. Instead, she folded the paper and handed it back. "What now?" she asked. "Now we go to Taloga," he said, "and we find a judge." They didn't get the chance. Druitt found them first. He rode into the canyon mouth at noon the next day with 4 men, hard men, armed men, men who worked for wages and didn't ask questions. Marcus Druitt was 45 years old, barrel-chested, with a black beard trimmed close and eyes the color of creek mud. He wore a long gray coat and a silver belt buckle shaped like a steer's skull. He was not a monster. That was the worst part. He was a businessman who had simply extended his understanding of property to include people. He looked at Verity the way a man looks at a horse that has jumped the fence. "That belongs to me," he said, pointing at her. He did not use her name. Obadiah stood in front of Verity with his revolver drawn. 4 against 1. The math was terrible. But math doesn't account for a man who has nothing left to lose and has just found the first thing worth dying for. "She doesn't belong to anyone," Obadiah said. Druitt smiled. It was the smile of a man who had never been told no by someone who meant it. "I have a bill of sale," Druitt said. "You can't own a person," Obadiah said. "The law in this territory says otherwise," Druitt replied. "Not for long." The voice came from behind Druitt. Everyone turned. Standing at the canyon mouth, on foot, dust-covered and trembling, was Ezra Pardoe. He had come. Verity's father, the man who had sold her, had ridden to Taloga and followed the tracks south. He looked like he might collapse, but he was standing. "I signed a confession," Ezra said, his voice cracking like dry wood. "Everything I did, everything you did, it's already with the territorial marshal in Taloga." Druitt's smile disappeared. His men looked at each other. "You're lying," Druitt said. "I'm a coward," Ezra said. "I've always been a coward, but I'm not lying. Not this time." He looked at Verity. His eyes filled. "I'm so sorry, little bird." Little bird. A name from childhood. A name Verity hadn't heard since her mother was alive. The sound hit her like a fist made of air. She grabbed the canyon wall, and her fingers pressed into the soft gypsum, leaving white marks in the rock. A sound came out of her. Not a word, not a cry. Something deeper. Something from the place where the girl she used to be still lived. Still waited. Still remembered a time when that name meant safety. Her knees buckled. Obadiah caught her arm, and Druitt, for the first time, looked afraid. Not of the gun, not of the confession, of the fact that the thing he had bought could not be owned, that the chain he had forged had been broken by the weakest man in the territory, finding one moment of strength. Druitt's men turned their horses, one by one. They were hired guns, not martyrs, and a territorial marshal with a signed confession meant prison or the rope. Druitt sat alone on his horse, his silver buckle catching the sun, his empire collapsing in real time. He looked at Verity, and for the first time she didn't look away. She stepped out from behind Obadiah. Her bandaged hands hung at her sides. Her back was straight. She looked up at the man who had bought her, chained her, branded her, and set her on fire. And she said quietly, "My name is Verity Pardoe, and you never once said it." Druitt's mouth opened. Nothing came out, because there was nothing left to say to a woman who had stopped being afraid of him. He turned his horse and rode north, slowly, like a man walking away from his own funeral. He would be arrested 2 weeks later at a rail station in Wichita. The confession and bill of sale entered into territorial court. He would die in prison 3 years later. Not with a bang, with a cough, and nobody came to collect the body. The canyon was quiet after he left. Just wind and breathing, and the sound of a woman crying for the first time in years, not from pain, but from the unbearable, flooding relief of being unclaimed. Free. A person, and not a thing. They stayed in Taloga, not because it was special. It was just a hard little town with a church and a saloon and dust that never settled. But it was the place where Verity had stopped running, and sometimes the place where you stop is the place where you begin. Obadiah took work at a ranch east of town, mending fences and breaking horses. Verity took a room above the general store, working for Mrs. Adair, who asked no questions and paid in coin and kindness. For the first month, they saw each other only in passing. A nod on the street, a cup of coffee left on a fence post, a bandana folded and placed on her windowsill without a word. The space between them was deliberate. Verity needed to learn that she could exist without belonging to someone. Obadiah needed to learn that staying didn't mean surrendering. Ezra Pardoe stayed in Taloga for 1 week. He slept in the livery stable and spoke to no one except his daughter. Their conversations were short and brutal, not with shouting, but with silence. Verity asked him one question on the 3rd day. "Did you count it?" Ezra blinked. "The money," she said, "when you sold me. Did you count the $40, or did you just take what he gave you?" Ezra looked at the ground. "I counted it," he whispered. Verity nodded. That was all she needed to know. On the 7th day, Ezra left town, heading north. He didn't say goodbye. He left a letter under her door. She didn't read it for 3 months. When she finally opened it, it contained one line. "You were worth more than I could count." She burned the letter. Then she planted a blue ribbon, the one from the tin box, the one Obadiah had buried and later retrieved, in a pot of soil on her windowsill. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a burial. A way of putting something dead into the earth and letting something new grow above it. Months passed. Obadiah built things, a new gate for the churchyard, a shelf for Mrs. Adair's store, a bench outside the livery where old men sat and talked about weather and horses. He built the way some men pray, with his hands in silence, as an offering to a world that owed him nothing. One evening, Verity found him sanding the bench in the fading light. She sat down on the half-finished wood and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "You never asked me what the M stands for." Obadiah kept sanding. "Didn't need to." "It stands for Marcus," she said, "but I've been thinking. I want it to stand for something else." He stopped sanding, looked at her. "Like what?" She paused. "Mine, as in, I'm mine, not his, not my father's, mine." Obadiah set down the sandpaper. The sunset behind them was copper and violet, painting the dust gold. "You were always yours," he said. "You just didn't have anyone who'd say it out loud." She looked at him. Really looked, the way you look at something you've decided to keep. "You didn't rescue me because you're a hero," she said. "You rescued me because you know what it's like to be left." He swallowed. Because she was right. Every fire he'd ever ridden toward was the fire no one had ridden toward for him. "I didn't have anything to offer you," she said softly. "No gold, no name, no land, just myself. And you treated that like it was enough." He looked at her. "It was enough," he said. "It was always enough." Soldier blue ribbon in the pot on her windowsill never grew into anything. But it didn't need to. It was a marker, a line in the soil between what was and what would be. Years later, the people of Taloga would know them as the couple who ran the ranch east of town, the quiet man with burned hands who built everything he touched, and the woman with dark hair and steady eyes who kept the books and taught children to read in the back of the church on Sundays. On her desk, she kept a tin box. Inside it, a daguerreotype photograph with the man's image cut away, leaving only the girl. On the back, in Verity's handwriting, a single word had replaced the old inscription. Not received, not sold, just free. And on the windowsill of their bedroom, a blue ribbon still stood in a pot of dry soil. Not growing, not dying, just remaining. A quiet monument to the truth that some things survive the fire. Not because they're strong, because someone came. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe to Wild West Talehouse. There are more stories coming from the frontier. Stories of the ones who survived, the ones who stayed, and the ones who were always enough.